Well, good afternoon, everybody. Whether you're sitting in your living room or your family room or in your den or wherever you may be, it's great to be with you this afternoon. This is Maundy Thursday. It is a day where we remember Jesus doing two things. One, washing the feet of the disciples, and the other is sharing in this meal of the Passover. And we're going to examine both of those, and we're going to be looking at the foot washing a little bit. I'm going to be sharing a drawing that I did over a number of years. And then we're going to kind of walk around the table as we examine why people were seated where they were and what this was all about. We're also going to look at two chapters in the book Easter Love Letters from God, and also a couple of scriptures as we walk through all this. Today we're going to talk a little bit also about what became for us communion. And so as we begin, as we walk through all of this, again, on this Maundy Thursday, I would invite all of us to enter into prayer. Will you pray with me? God, as we are wherever we may be today, we ask that your ever-present love surround each one as they're watching, whether it is live today or later on sometime this week or in the following weeks. God, we ask that you surround on this day those who are struggling, whether it is with COVID-19 or any other way. God, help us remember the importance of washing each other's feet. And as we examine that and examine this Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples, we ask your blessing on our time. And we ask this in the powerful name of the one that we seek to follow, Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, let me open with our first scripture reading, which comes out of John 13, and it's John 13, 3 through 17. It goes like this. Jesus, knowing that God had put all things into his own hands, and that he had come from God and was returning to God, rose from the table, took off his outer clothes, and wrapped a towel around his waist. He then poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and then dry them with a towel, the same towel that was around his waist. But when Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said, "Rabbi, you're not going to wash my feet, are you?" And Jesus answered, "Peter, you don't realize what I'm doing right now, but later you will understand." Peter replied, "You will never wash my feet." And Jesus answered, "If I don't wash you, Peter, you have no part with me." Well, Simon Peter then said to Jesus, "Then, Rabbi, not only my feet, but my hands and my head as well." And Jesus said, "Any who have taken a bath are clean all over and only need to wash their feet. And Peter, you're clean, but not every one of you seated at this table is clean." For Jesus knew who was to betray him. That is why he said, "Not all of you are clean." Well, after washing their feet, Jesus put on his clothes and returned to the table. And he said to them, "Do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher. You call me sovereign. And rightly so, for I am. If I, then, your teacher and sovereign, have washed your feet, you should wash each other's feet. What I've done now is given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. The truth of the matter is, no subordinate is greater than the superior. No messenger outranks the sender. Now, once you know all these things, you will be blessed if you put them into practice. And then, as we are all week, I'm going to turn to Easter Love Letters from God, and I'm going to read the chapter called What Love Looks Like. It goes like this. Well, the disciples were excited. Jesus had invited them to a secret supper That they'd been walking through the dusty and dirty streets of Jerusalem all day, and by the time they reached the special room, their feet would be filthy. Thank goodness a servant would be there to wash their feet for them. They didn't want to have dirty feet at dinner time. They were going to eat with a king. But what a surprise was waiting for the disciples. When they arrived at the room, there was no servant there. It was Jesus kneeling on the floor, a bowl of soapy water next to him, and he had a towel wrapped around his waist. Right there, in that room, Jesus showed his disciples what love looked like. He took their feet in his hands, and he washed them, just like a servant would. The hands that created the world washed their feet. The special one from heaven made the disciples feel like they were the special ones. That is what love looks like, Jesus said. Love tells people how special they are. Love makes someone feel wonderful. When I'm gone, go into the world and take love with you. The disciples didn't understand that Jesus was going to leave them, but they understood now what love looked like, because the King of Love had shown them. And then the letter. Did you know that the disciples did what Jesus asked them? They never forgot how Jesus washed their feet that night. They never forgot how much Jesus loved them. So they took that love into the world. And can you do the same? Never forget how much Jesus loves you. Show that love to others. If you do that, everyone will know that you are one of his disciples. Love God. Well, I'm going to have Jen move over, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a drawing that I've done really over the last, it's kind of been the last 12 years. And we're going to focus on that for a few moments. And I just want to talk about that a little bit. But Jen, just on the drawing, you don't need to have the camera on me at all. When I drew this, and as I have drawn this, I even said earlier to Jen that even this morning as I was looking at it, I saw things that needed to be done that I'll probably just add to the drawing. But what I did as I drew this is I tried to picture myself at that table. I tried to see the hands that were taking this on, the hands of a carpenter, hands that were not soft but calloused, hands that were not clean or manicured, but dirty and rough, and even the nails a bit broken. Again, the hands of a carpenter. And that's what I tried to draw. Every time I work on this picture, and I have again over the last probably 12 years, I see little pieces that were unfinished, but it reminds me of certain people who, without probably their knowledge of really what they were doing, I see them as foot washers, as folks who have washed my feet or served in such a way that it reminds me that I'm loved by Christ. I think of, here are a few examples. I think of Bishop Grant Padilla, and I was going to give him a copy of this before he left back to Southern California, and I'm still planning on doing this. I think of our current bishop, Elaine Stanovsky. I think of our superintendent, Derek McConnell, who has really walked with me throughout my whole ordination process. I thought back about 4 years ago of riding the Seattle to Portland, the STP, on my bike, and I remember about 40 miles outside of Portland, they call it bonking. And bonking is where you just become exhausted. You can't move any farther. And there were two who, one literally washed us. She had a hose that was showering all the cyclists, which just was so amazing. But it was Stan McKenzie who helped me so much of just letting me sit and just encouraging me, washing my feet. There's another who I know probably doesn't know what she has done for me. And it is my intention before moving to get her a copy of this. I told her that I wanted to give her a gift, but now, if she's watching, she'll know what it is. It's Reverend Dr. Kathleen James. Kathleen has been an amazing support, an amazing mentor for so many of us. An example of what being Christ-like is. I think of Burl Ingram and how long we've known each other and the servant heart that she has. I think of our own Joe Lee and what he has just always sought to do as a disciple. And I think of this church. As Dorothy and I prepare to depart from here, I think of all that you have done. And it reminded me that a copy of this picture was, and I think still is, hanging in the entrance area of Grace Boarding House in Thailand, in Mae Sot, Thailand. It is a part of what you do. You are constantly, as a church, seeking to wash each other's feet and wash the feet of those most in need in the world. It is why I so love you and will so miss you. At the same time, what I thought of as I was drawing is what Peter might have thought as he saw Jesus approaching his feet. And I couldn't imagine, Peter couldn't imagine Jesus ever doing anything like this. And I'll talk more about that when we look at the table. But Jesus didn't give them a choice. No one would have asked the lowliest of servants to do the most filthy thing, and that is to wash feet. But Jesus did it. I imagine Peter looking down at the eyes, into the eyes of Jesus, and seeing some sadness there. And then Jesus saying to him, "This is what being a true servant looks like. And I am asking you to do this and be this once I'm gone. This is what love looks like, Peter. This." Can't you understand? Can't you? And if you can't, then you really don't understand me. Well, friends, let me just bring this to a part of it to a close, and just, I wonder if we understand really what being a servant looks like. So what love really looks like. And maybe today, in this time, we see it more and more than any time that I can remember. We see it in the nurses and the doctors who go and get into harm's way to help. We see it in neighbors helping neighbors. We see it in a church continually trying to seek out to those who are most vulnerable. So I have to ask, do you understand, and are you taking on washing the feet of those in need? Let's take just a moment and just think about that in a time of just kind of quiet reflection, maybe as you look at the picture, maybe as you just pray. Just a couple minutes, and then we'll hear Pam and Jason play. Jen to move back over. I want to talk about this table a little bit, and before I read the scripture, because I think it's important to understand how this was set up at the Last Supper. And it's really quite interesting. This is called a triclinium table. Triclinium meaning three sides, equal distance on both sides. I wasn't quite able to do that on this table. For that night, and this was the Passover feast, there would be 4 folks, disciples on each side. But there is an order to it, and the order is important to understand as we understand the reading of this scripture. First of all, we think of Da Vinci's Last Supper, where he has Jesus at the center and saying somehow that this is the head of the table. Well, that's not true. The head of the table is over here, and the head of the table is really, in this setup, is the second person in, and that is Jesus, and that's why the Christ candle is here. And so on Jesus' left, right here, would be Judas, and Judas Iscariot, because Judas was kind of his senior counsel. He was really kind of the lawyer of the group, the person who oversaw the funds and those kinds of things. But on his right here, would have been young John. On the right of the host is someone intimately familiar with the host. And often it's the child of a host. And there is some scholarship that says that potentially John and Jesus shared the same couch. And let me And we talked about that. They didn't sit in chairs. They reclined. The tables were lower, and they reclined so that their feet were out and their hands were available, and they'd sit kind of on their sides as they shared the meal with each other. So John, the youngest of the disciples, the disciple whom Jesus loved, Jesus, Judas, and then it works its way around the table of the most honorable folks. And then over on this side, at the end, is the most honored guest, right here. And the most honored guest, some would say, was probably Peter. This would have been where Peter was sitting. But there is another understanding. At the end of each table, at the end of the tables that come out this way, servants stand. These are folks who will serve the Passover meal. They are not freeborn Jews, but slave Jews. And some would say that after Jesus washed the disciples' feet, that what he did was he may have sat at the servant location to say, this is what being my disciple looks like. And that maybe after that conversation with Peter, what he might have done was Peter may have moved to the place of a servant. But this is where the Passover feast is done. And as many of you know, the Passover feast is very symbolic. It has 4 cups of wine. It has lamb. It has matzah bread, unleavened bread. It has bitter herbs. And it all goes back to the memories and understanding of what happened at the Passover, when death passed over the Jews in Egypt and they were able to escape, but by God's grace. And so here they are, seated. But what happens beyond the foot washing, no one expected that Jesus would change the words. But Jesus changed the words. And so now let me go back, and I'll bring the scriptures, and I'll come out to that direction, and the book. And here, the story out of Luke on how this takes place. This is from the 22nd chapter of Luke, beginning with the 14th verse through verse 20. Look at the table as I read. When the hour had come, Jesus took a place at the table with the apostles. Jesus said to them, I have come to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. I tell you, I will not eat it again until everything is fulfilled in the reign of God. Then taking a cup of wine, Jesus gave thanks and said, take this and share it among you. I tell you this, I will not drink wine from now on until the reign of God comes. Then Jesus took bread and gave thanks for it, broke it, and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which will be given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Jesus did the same with the cup after the supper and said, this cup is the cup of a new covenant, now in my blood, which will be poured out for you. This is the cup of a new covenant in my blood, which will be poured out for you. Now let me open up again Easter love letters from God, and let's look at the next chapter, which is the secret supper. This is how it goes. The disciples were ready for their secret supper with Jesus. Their feet were now clean. The table was set. They were hungry. But Jesus was quiet. His eyes were sad as he looked around the table at his friends. He knew this was the last meal he would ever eat with them. Jesus picked up a loaf of bread and broke it. The disciples watched as crumbs fell to the table. This broken bread is like my body, Jesus said. For my body will be broken for you. Then Jesus took a pitcher of wine. The disciples watched as he filled the cup. This wine is like my blood, Jesus said softly. Whenever you eat bread, whenever you drink wine, remember me. What did Jesus mean? Well, the disciples were scared. It sounded like he was going to leave them. And then he said, don't let your hearts be troubled. I'm going somewhere wonderful. You can't come with me yet, but one day I will come back and take you there. It's a beautiful, happy place with lots of rooms. It's a home that's big enough for everyone. And I'm going to go and get it ready for you. The disciples were still worried. How would they know how to get to the special place? But Jesus told them, I am the way. Jesus whispered, believe in me. Be like me. Live like me. Love like me. Because I am the way to heaven. In God's letter to each of us. Close your eyes. I want you to imagine a big, beautiful home with so many rooms you can't count them. Imagine every room is filled with love and laughter and happiness. It's a place you never want to leave because of all the fun and the joy and the peace there. Okay, open your eyes. You just imagined my home in heaven. Jesus wants everyone in the whole world to live there with him. And the best part is that my home is not hard to find. Jesus will show you the way. Well, friends, as we kind of come to a close in this, again, I have just a question for you. As we prepare for tomorrow, which is Good Friday, as we prepare for the rest of the week, and tomorrow at noon we'll be looking at the scriptures that surround the rest of Jesus' life. But on this day, I have to ask, are you willing to allow Jesus to wash you? Or are we so reticent, like Peter, to allow that in us? Are we too prideful to allow something more in each of our lives? What Jesus has shown us is what love looks like. What Jesus has shown us is what true servanthood is. And it always makes me think back of where in Matthew he says, in as much as you have done it for the least of these, my brother, you do it for me. Friends, may the rest of your day go beautifully well. I hope to see you tomorrow at noon. And as we come to a close, Pam and Jason are going to play. And then I'll give a quiet benediction, and we'll go in peace. to bring the service to a close, the choir has also given us a gift today. It's one of my favorite songs, a beautiful song that is so perfect for this service. We'll close with that. Just I think many of us are and some of us have turned to kind of, as someone said, Corona time. But I keep thinking, I can't help but thinking of as we look at all of this, and Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, of all those who are out serving in incredible ways. Not only washing feet, but trying to help people feel comfortable. Any nurse that I know or any doctor that I know who goes into a room where someone is really struggling, and I've had pneumonia, I know how serious that is. It's also the words of encouragement that they give. It's the words, along with the actions, that do so much to help us understand what it means to serve. Well, friends, as we move through this Holy Week, let's remember, it's on us now. It's on us to serve. And there are folks all around us who need us to step up and serve them. Let's wash their feet, shall we? And this is the way that we do it. Bill?